My name is Taruna Goel. I'm an RPL strategist and I work with North Pacific Metrics here in Vancouver, Canada. I have spent close to 3 decades working at the intersection of adult learning, assessment, competency recognition, and workforce development. And my work has taken to many corners of the RPL ecosystem. And I can tell you that there are more than 4 corners because the ecosystem is more like an amoeba rather than a neat little square. And working with learners and employers, post-secondary institutions, regulators, and governments, one thing I've learned is that while all of these groups may be interested in RPL, they're often listening for very different things. The idea of this session emerged from one of the PLAR community of learning conversations that we had earlier this year, actually the first one in January, first for this year, where we were asked as participants, what can we do as members of this community to kind of help move the needle when it comes to sharing what RPL is? And we had a great conversation during that session, and the question kind of stayed with me because it made me reflect on something I've experienced repeatedly across my RPL work. RPL doesn't always have a value problem, but sometimes the message just doesn't land. And for years, I thought if we could just explain RPL clearly enough, everyone would immediately see its value. But as someone wiser has said, the biggest problem with communication is our illusion that it has taken place. So I titled this session Moving the Needle with RPL because to me, that metaphor felt accurate. The expression moving the needle actually comes from analog VU meters used in sound recording. And if the sound was too soft, the needle simply didn't move and nothing was registered, even though the recording was technically happening. So the sound had to be loud enough and in the right range to register and for the needle to move. And across Canada and the world, we are doing, high quality, rigorous, thoughtful, impactful recognition work. And this first International Day of Recognition by PLAR is a testament to all the good work that we've been hearing about since this morning. But if the language we use doesn't resonate with the systems or key players that we are speaking to, the needle may not move. And our message will not be loud enough to register. And if nothing is registered, then even important work can and kind of does remain invisible. One of the challenges of facing RPL field is that much of our language has actually evolved from the perspective of practitioners and institutions. I often say this to my friends and colleagues that one of the occupational hazards of working in RPL is that we kind of become too attached to our terminology. We throw terms like prior learning assessment, portfolio review, challenge process, credit assessment, and all of these terms make sense to those of us who kind of work in the field, but they often describe the mechanism rather than the value of RPL. So I've come to appreciate that the language and vocabulary that we use to talk about RPL, it fundamentally sort of shapes how it is understood, how it's valued, and how it's acted upon. And this isn't just a theoretical observation, it's something that I've learned the hard way through repeated experiences where the same RPL model and approach landed very differently depending on how it was framed or who was listening. And what I found is that people don't care about the definition or the process of RPL for itself. They engage with the outcomes of RPL that align with their needs. So what are we doing today? We are going to get into a hands-on activity. If you did not know, this is an interactive session. So time to get your keyboards out and your fingers doing the work. This is where we are going to build the language of RPL together in real time. And I just added a link to a Padlet in the chat. And if you're on your mobile device, you can scan the QR code. In the Padlet, you'll see 4 key players of the RPL ecosystem arranged in sort of like 4 columns. We have learners or candidates. We have post-secondary institutions. We have employers and industry, and then we also have the government and regulators. When I say PSIs, it can include colleges and universities, but it can also include polytechnics and continuing ed divisions. And similarly, within government or regulators, you can include sector associations and apprenticeship bodies. So what we'll do next is that under each key player, I'd like you to please add words, phrases, or outcomes you think or would resonate with that player when describing RPL. So this is not what we usually say or what we usually hear about RPL, but what you think they will sort of most respond to.
Can't hear you.
So let me also share the Padlet in this presentation today.
No, your thing is microphone is muted.
Sorry, is that for me? Are you able to hear me?
No, I just muted the button.
Okay. If you're doing this on your mobile, yes, the columns might look somewhat different, but you should still be able to participate in the activity. And I'm going to give you a few minutes as you share your thoughts and reflections in the Padlet. You can also upvote any terms or words or outcomes that you think you relate to within each of these systems and key players. So we are seeing some really great words that you've been sharing for learners and candidates. There's a lot around who they are as people and how they'd like to be seen, I suppose. For post-secondary institutions, I can definitely see enrollment, access, evaluation, but also gatekeepers. A lot of terms around education, instructors, diplomas, employers and industry. It's being reflected their lens on RPL and what they understand from it. It's around job readiness, opportunities, career advancement, skills, proficiency, partnership. And then for government and regulators, we have a lot of standards, economic development, national priorities, financing RPL, compliance. I'm going to scroll a little bit more to see what others have come. Post-secondary credit granted is money lost. That's an interesting way to share the lens that PSI sometimes have on RPL and PLAR. Emancipation, meeting goals, confidence, and respect for capabilities coming up for the candidates. This is excellent. Please continue to kind of add your contributions, and I'm going to try and switch back to our presentation there. So what patterns kind of stood out to you as you were participating in that Padlet activity, or you were thinking about all of these players in the ecosystem? If you don't mind just sharing your feedback or comments in the chat here. What player was easiest to write for, and who was the hardest? I look forward to reading what you have to say in the chat, but based on what I saw, candidates and learners, there was a lot of emotionally charged language, which was about, recognition and validation, confidence. And that's what made me say candidates often talk about being seen. For post-secondary institutions, the language is very much around education, credit pathways, progression, academic integrity, and sometimes it's about how RPL processes can increase student recruitment and enhance institutional efficiency. As we saw, employers were a lot about being productive. It's, access to qualified workers, skill verification, and workplace productivity in general. And then we saw that government and regulators, the terms were about the overall system, I suppose, labor market needs and quality assurance. And Jeff says it's hardest to articulate what it means for employers. Yes, for sure, I agree. I think we're going to just go through the next 4 slides where I will share from my experience how I've been able to articulate this for different players in the RPL system. And looking at the Padlet, we know that each player in that system is listening for something very different. So the same RPL process can be actually interpreted in 4 very different ways, depending on, what is being said and who is hearing the message. And for learners and candidates, the question is never how rigorous is the RPL assessment. It's always about, will this help me move forward? They're listening for kind of signals that their existing knowledge and skills and experiences recognize, it's valued. And so the language that I've observed that kind of resonates with them is around progress, it's around opportunity, it's around confidence. And they want to know if their experience counts, if they have to repeat what they've learned before, and what is going to help them achieve their goal faster. So for them, the effective messaging focuses on momentum rather than on the process itself. For post-secondary institutions, I find that they listen through a completely different lens, because at all points, their responsibility is to ensure that credentials sort of maintain their credibility and that the learning outcomes are achieved. And so they are less concerned with acceleration and more concerned with equivalency and quality assurance and academic integrity. And if we kind of describe RPL as an alternative or an exception, or even though I don't like this term, a bypass mechanism, it does create a lot of resistance. But when we frame it more like a structured assessment process, that measures achievement of the same learning outcomes that are expected of every learner, I've seen that the conversation changes. It kind of shifts from risk to rigor. And they are constantly looking for how to maintain standards while providing more flexible pathways. Employers. So we know that employers don't wake up thinking about RPL. All they are thinking about at all points are workforce capability. So their main concern is that people can perform productively and consistently in the workplace. So things like, or words like credits or advanced standing, these have limited meaning in sort of an industry context. And what matters more is time to competence. The employers knowing that they don't have to spend so much on training and that they have confidence that the skills have been verified. So the language that I've seen that resonates with employers is faster deployment of existing talent. And so they're always looking to answer the question, how can you contribute quickly? And how confident do I feel that you have the skills and competencies? And that is what I've seen, in employer engagement. That is the shift that happens when RPL is sort of described as a way to confirm what the workers already know and can do, rather than as an academic sort of exercise. Government and regulatory bodies, of course, operate at the systems levels. They are not thinking primarily on an individual advancement or just an organization's productivity. The concern is the system fair? Is it consistent? Is it transparent? Is it defensible? And does it impact the labor market and the economic growth? And so the terms that work for them are consistency, defensibility, public protection, trust. And I sort of, in these conversations, avoid the language of using documented evidence, assessor calibration, decision auditability, things like that, and make it less about informal judgment call or an academic activity and more about a risk managed sort of system. And RPL, when it's framed like a system level enabler, it does and the fact that it can improve workforce responsiveness, it can support mobility, it can advance equity. Those kind of terms really work well with employers. So the point that I'm trying to make in all of that is that the language of RPL matters because systems tend to respond to what they can recognize. And if the language doesn't resonate, the needle really doesn't move. And the most successful RPL initiatives are not the ones that have the most sophisticated assessment tools or policies. They're actually the ones that have become fluent in using the right language. And when we kind of, there is an opportunity and a challenge when we rely on this one-size-fits-all RPL language. But in all of those cases, we almost always miss somebody. It can sound too academic in workforce context. It can sound sometimes too operational, in academic context. And sometimes in policy conversations, all of this can sound very abstract. It doesn't mean that the practice lacks value. It means that the value of the practice hasn't quite been translated. But when we communicate RPL through these different lenses, the conversation shifts from us trying to explain the process to instead us trying to demonstrate in its value. And that is the power of this differentiated language. The practice remains the same, but the language shifts to connect with what each player cares about the most. So, how do we move the needle with RPL? The VU meter kind of represents the players that we're trying to influence, the learners, the post-secondary institutions, the employers of the industry, and the government and regulators. And the needle represents their attention, interest, and uptake. The sound is our message about RPL that is kind of tailored and customized to these players. And if the sound is technically correct, but if it's too quiet or if it's misdirected or it's outside the frequency that the system responds to, we can't expect the needle to move. And if the needle doesn't move, nothing is registered, no matter how good our content and work is. But the right words at the right volume, the needle moves and the positive impact is felt. There's progress for learners, there's integrity for institutions, there is productivity for employers, and there is defensibility for regulators. So I think what I've observed is to be an effective RPL practitioner, we have to become translators of this value and not just administrators of the process. As I was working on this presentation, I came upon a question and I wanted to leave you with the same question that has stayed with me. If your RPL practice disappeared tomorrow, who would notice? Would employers notice? Would learners recognize something is missing? Would institutions care about RPL or PLAR practice gone? And what about policymakers from the system perspective? So, and if they would notice, would they have the language to explain what just went missing? So as skill shortages continue and career pathways are becoming less linear and learning is increasingly happening outside of formal education settings, the need for these trusted recognition systems will grow. And the opportunity is not just to improve our RPL practice, it's actually to create recognition systems that are understood, that are trusted, and that are valued across the entire ecosystem. And I think that starts with language. So thank you for your time today, and I hope together we can continue to build and expand on the language and vocabulary of RPL to help move the needle.